See, look, we can play this flat or we can play it round. I'm not Claiborne Pell. I do not have his gentlemanly ways. And if you want to fight, I'm your guy. But if you want to make the committee work, he said, I want to make the committee work. Now, Jesse Helms in the leadership could beat me every day in a fight. He has the numbers, and he's extremely good at it. But we made an agreement.
But you could make life difficult.
That we were going to make the committee relevant again. And even though we've disagreed substantively, with the single exception of the ambassadorial nominee from Massachusetts to be ambassador to Mexico, Senator Helms has been straightforward in allowing us to air out, fight out, and determine, as the committee should, and give its advice to the... but again, look at the transition that's taking place. The world has changed drastically, and it changes almost in geometric proportions in the last 8 to 10 years. Yeah, there are a few things that I note when I speak to him that really animate his interest and his... another one is the question of sexual preference,
right,
on the social realm. But the interest work, and he goes and fights it out now, rather than simply Senator, no,
right,
we won't bring anything up. But I think what I know what the senator realized is that you can't be a relevant chairman of a major committee if you do nothing. Other committees are going to take your function.
I know you know this, but I'd love to have you talk to it.
Beyond that, in the scope of things where the U.S. national interest is and where it lies, I believe the president thought it was more important to maintain in the Russian parliament,
right,
the Duma, and as opposed to normalizing. So the hard part for a president is determining where he is going to sort of expend his ammunition. Because in each of these issues, Charlie, that the president has had to engage on, and I quite frankly think he's done a fine job in foreign policy.
Bill Clinton has done a fine job in foreign policy.
I think he has. I think he has. The most significant thing he's done is not viewed as a foreign policy initiative, and that's opening world markets. I think his trade policy has been the single most significant foreign policy initiative he has undertaken.
And he's had as many Republican allies for that as he has Democrats.
Exactly right. Exactly right. As a matter of fact, it's the one thing that almost split our caucus and almost split the Democratic Party. And the second thing...
almost caused problems for...
There is, within the Republican Party, a more strenuous debate on whether or not we are going to engage the world as internationalists, as traditional Republicans have in the last 25 years, or whether we are going to be quasi-isolationist or at least unilateralist, making judgments on our own. And within the Democratic Party, that's less of a fight. There is more of a consensus on being internationalists, engaging the world. And the real test for the next president of the United States is how he is going to, in my view, in the area of foreign policy, how he chooses to engage the world. Now, I don't know enough about, and I mean this sincerely, I don't know enough about the possibility of a President Bush.
Her expertise is with Russia.
Yes, and that, to me, is both a positive and a negative. He is overly concerned about the return of the Russian bear as a robust problem, as opposed to integrating Russia into the West. Then I will have a philosophic problem with everybody.
But it's, yeah, sure.
On the phone to me, it's Joe. I mean, you know, Robertson I've known for years. Is this correct?
Yeah.
And the honest answer to the question is, I don't know, and I don't know enough to know where George...
He did say later that he was satisfied by the response he got, that this was not as it seemed.
Well, that's why but to be completely honest with you, I'm fully prepared and anxious to cooperate with whomever the next president is, including, I mean that sincerely. So there's been a lot of things we've had a general consensus at cross-party lines. But because of the world having changed so much, Charlie, I think a lot of people are rethinking a lot of these basic, fundamental areas of consensus. I just don't know. And but I am hopeful. Now, he's one of the finest men in public life. Because his view as, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it is perceived to be the following: that for us to be engaged physically anywhere in the world, we have to know two things. Not only what the first step is, what's the last step is. What is the exit strategy before we begin? And number two, a preponderance and a domination of force and firepower. Now, I know from firsthand experience when I was trying to convince, and ultimately did, he convinced himself as well. I don't mean to suggest he only moved because of me. President Clinton on how many forces do we need? And he said, if my memory serves me correctly, 350,000 forces. And I said, well, not what no. If we're going to commit, you got to commit. Now, if that's the standard, we're not going to commit anywhere. There would be genocide. It won't do anything.
Paralyzed.
Now, I'm not sure it's fair for me in a unipolar world, with us the only superpower. We used to be able to, in a bipolar world, game out our move, the other superpowers move. They were cautious, we were cautious, and we could figure where this was going to take us. It was not playing a game. It was a legitimate and important exercise to undertake. And that is I ask myself the question now, and it's almost heretical. What happens if we don't act? If the answer is clear as can be, what will happen if we don't act, then I ask myself the next question. How much can we do to affect the outcome in a positive way? If there's no reasonable prospect of us affecting the outcome in a reasonable way, then I say don't get engaged. But I don't ask what my colleagues on the Republican side all seem to ask. That is, well, can you tell me, if you do A, what will the response be? B. And where do you get to A, B, C, and D, and when are we out? You know, the American people don't have patience. The American people have more patience than their leaders have. Thirdly, I hear, well, if we move now, the peace in the region would collapse, therefore the exercise is a failure. And I always say to these guys, hey, what would happen if I was senator in 1954? And I said, you know, the fact that we cannot pull troops out of Germany now without worrying about the Fulda Gap being breached and West Germany going down means our whole policy is a failure. Why the heck, because he works for the Mr. Kofi Annan. Now, at the end of his presentation, I was amazed at the unanimity, including the Russians, around two. We have to understand that there's a need to have a gendarmerie, have a police force that's developed that has quasi-military powers in the interim to turn the water on and keep the street lights working, and making sure that when John so-and-so beats up his wife, he gets arrested like he would if we're a real country. I wouldn't go into the detail except to suggest that I came away from that Security Council meeting that I spoke at, that our colleagues in the rest of the world are beginning to figure this out. For example, I said in my statement, we can never have a blue helmets being answerable to civilian control. So I think we inadvertently generated two sort of germs out there that, if they're not managed well, could cause a larger problem. You can't tell your kid once, don't speed. You can't tell your kid once, you got to keep cutting the grass. And I think, notwithstanding the fact that things look awfully bleak right now, for us to stand down and not continually push the process, even though we have no realistic hope of something major happening immediately, I think it would in effect have the opposite impact if we were to stand down. I think things would really spiral totally out of control, which in a sense prevents more drastic action from happening, from the independent declaration to more open and direct hostilities. Should we, sometime to my detriment, a very strong supporter. And I do not think that we should, on the other hand, dictate to any, and we were perilously close to that happening. I've become a great respecter of fate in history, but for a stone that literally knocked out the equivalent of the chief of police. The answer is yes, but I have been sort of the skunk at the family picnic on this for a long time. And I don't know him well, but I've been in this company many times. I have always, my grandpa Finnegan used to have an expression. He'd say, Joey, I'm not sure the horse can carry that sleigh. I'm not sure and have not been sure to the mountain.
Right.
As a bargaining chip in world public opinion. And I think it was a major miscalculation. Now I'm not at all certain. I don't know, who after, no. And so he's the only game in town.